headlines from an African perspective.
And that's exactly what we're doing here on Africa World Hour. We continue now looking at what are the top stories throughout the regions. It's obviously attracted much attention. It's about the democratic process that is unfolding in Malawi. Vote counting continues. People of the Southern Africa country are eagerly awaiting the final results. Early vote counts from northern Malawi showed former President Peter Mutharika taking an early lead. However, projections indicate that the election could head to a runoff, with no candidate expected to surpass the 50% threshold required for an outright win. The elections were monitored by various observer missions. One such is the Africa Centre for Governance, which is headed by former South African Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu. She joins us now to speak to us about their observation of the elections. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Tepiso, and thank you for the opportunity for our organization to present itself. Thank you.
Perhaps let's just first start with preliminary observations of how the election was run and how the counting process is proceeding, especially because this oftentimes becomes a very controversial issue because of the legal stipulations of the vote counting, transparency around it, and the announcement of the results.
Yes, thank you very much for that opportunity. We have been here as an organization, and we have deployment across the country. Of course, we could not cover as much as we possibly could because it's quite expensive to have, when you are an organization like ours, it's very expensive to have everyone almost in each and every corner. However, what we have experienced, and me having arrived in the short-term observer, we have what we call the long-term observer, where you deploy much earlier to the rest of the country. And then you have your short-term, which is the people that come in the middle, and the head of mission like myself, I arrived already to get reports from all the deployments that we have. What I experienced together with my team has been very different in comparison to the previous elections in terms of the preparation, but also in terms of the Malawi Electoral Commission, its preparation for these elections, their capacity, and the ability to deploy throughout the country. What is of advantage for us is that we are part and parcel of the SADC Electoral Observers Mission. So we sit in those meetings where the observers from SADC, including other international observers, including, for instance, the EU, we were sitting together in the same meeting. What came out was, one, the calmness under which the elections have been held; two, the preparedness by the Malawi Electoral Commission; three, even in terms of the security and all, there were no heavy incidences that might have been reported of disturbances, of people not being able to exercise their rights to vote. So far, it's been going very well.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the collaboration that media observers enjoin in arriving at an informed decision around the security of delivery of election materials. But now I want to talk about media freedom. We've seen in some African countries worrying trends of the media, and indeed the law prohibiting practices such as photographing ballots. Have there been reports that indicate any type of restrictions on journalists and voters' right to information to ensure the freeness and fairness of this election?
What I experienced, which was very exciting for me, was the Situation Room Center, which I have never experienced in any place, where you have civil society organizations, women's organizations, legal teams, the police, and the media, which I found very interesting that there was in that center. It's a center where when problems are being picked up by any of the entities that I have mentioned, they immediately communicate with each other and they immediately request that action be taken, which also include if in any case the media is being intimidated, the media is not being allowed to do their work, and the environment is not being created for them to be able to do their work, that is reported immediately to the situation room. And situation room, I found it to be quite an interesting situation room, because it happens now. It's in real time. Any problem that is picked up in any place is reported to the situation room, and the situation room in turn has got a link with communication with the Malawi Electoral Commission and all the other structures, which include security, for instance, to say this is where we have a problem, and the media here is being their life is being made difficult. I found that very interesting. I have not come across in the reports that were presented, we did not come across complaints of that nature where the media was said to have not been allowed. But of course, one cannot necessarily one cannot necessarily say almost everywhere the media was treated well, but so far we never got any report that indicated the negative.
Okay, so it sounds like freedom of expression, especially when it comes to the media, is being observed and there's an environment that creates for that. So I want to look at technological failures, because that's another form of freedom of expression during a democratic process like elections. There have been complaints ahead of time about the biometric features of fingerprinting, the inability to read that in some stations. Has there been reports of disenfranchising voters because of the smart card technology which has been introduced? Has there been any reports of that?
What was reported was in some instances where the systems would fail, but what they did was, if the system is failing, then they have an alternative. In fact, where we went, at least what I experienced, we did not experience the failure of the system. And the good thing for us as our organization, we were even able to meet with the service provider, because we thought it might be of interest to us to have a better understanding of the technology that is being used and what would be the challenges thereof. So even in the reports that we got today from the international observers in the meeting where we were, there was very little raising concern that people were unable to exercise or they were disenfranchised because of the system. The system was very good, because if your biometric, which means your finger doesn't work, it had facial recognition, which I saw for myself where we went, in the areas where we went, a few of the ones we saw where the biometric didn't seem to be working, or somebody had actually forgotten their card. As long as they are there, they are presenting themselves, they were able to then show their face, and then the technology, the system would pick up the name, the area which the person comes from. I found this to be very interesting, because I think moving forward, it will be very important for us to use technology as much as we possibly can, because when you do so, I feel you reduce some of the interferences that are sometimes made by human beings at a polling station.
Now, I want to talk about the comment made by the Malawi Electoral Commission warning against disinformation, misinformation campaigns as the election results are being tabulated, and against early announcement of unverified results. Has there been any incident that could draw concern as a result of social media flooded rumors, or any hint that information is being distorted to suit propaganda?
Again, I go back to the situation room, because one of the things that was highlighted by those that are dealing with the media and communication, they were dealing specifically also with the issue of social media, where there's disinformation and misinformation that might end up steering in some areas, people rising up against misinformation. I think they've managed this very well, because I think what is also important is for them not to have said, okay, we don't want this social media, we're going to shut it down. We'll shut it down because it's part of what we think creates a problem. Since I arrived here, I can tell you the flow in engaging also with the observers who are here and being on the ground. People are actually using the social media to communicate, but of course, those that have their issues which are related to the state of the people and the conditions of the people, that one is something that will continue to be raised by people, because as an organization, for instance, we're saying we cannot just be monitoring the elections. Of course, we are guided by the principles, we are guided by the constitution here, we are guided by SADC regulations and all. At the same time, we are very conscious of the fact that we can't monitor elections and close our ears and our eyes to some of the serious challenges that are faced by the people on the ground, because we also engaged with the communities. We went out to the communities, and of course, most of them, where we went to, they said, yes, they are going to vote, and the reason why they're going to vote is because they want a change to the conditions under which they find themselves, and they're hoping that the leadership that they will elect will be conscious of their needs as ordinary citizens.
And finally, taking corrective action is something that is within the purview of observer missions as they observe the counting process. What are you permitted to do where there are allegations or instances of partisan behavior that may threaten the credibility of the voting process and outcome of results?
We are allowed to report when we now give for instance, we gave our preliminary report to the SADC and the international observers. We are able to raise those concerns in our preliminary report, which we did, and then we will also have to raise that in our final report. We'll have to look at the things that we felt maybe they could have done better, because again, we don't observe for purposes of just observing. Our aim, in particular, the organization that I'm working with now, is seriously to uphold democratic norms and foster transparency and make sure that the citizens' vote is protected, so that the citizen can feel the comfort that institutions are there to serve their interests. So whatever issues we saw along the line, we were able to raise in our report. Let me just make an example. One of the things that was disturbing for us is to get to a voting station and see that what was supposed to be there for women who are pregnant, for women who are having little babies, for the elderly, for people with disability, we found that in some places they were not catered for, and then they have to stand up in long queues. Those are the issues that we definitely raised even in our report. We will also have it in our final report, because the quest of all this at the end of the day is to see electoral processes in the entire African continent being improved, where citizens can have confidence that when they go to cast their vote will be protected.
And we thank you very much for your time. That is the head of mission, observer mission in Malawi's elections for the Africa Center for Governance, and just giving us feedback on what they've observed and how the interaction with other election observer missions has yielded pretty much what she says is positive results of the electoral process in Malawi, and what they're empowered to do, and the reports they've already written on the concerns that they have observed. Lindiwe Zulu, South Africa's former social development minister.